as well. So the child that is born overseas who is Bermudian, when they become of childbearing age, whether or not they have lived in Bermuda, whether or not they've ever come back to Bermuda, because they are Bermudian and they have a child that's born overseas, that child will also be Bermudian automatically at birth. Okay? Now, there is some administration. We have to know that you exist. So there will be something that has to come back here so that we can add you to the list of Bermudian status holders. But it is not in any way intended to be the same process that we have now, which is affidavits and all types of other paperwork that has to be completed. Okay? So that was the solution that was come up with for that one. The question that we often get is, okay, that's fine. That is for, let's say that this bill is enacted and it becomes law as of June 1st, 2020. Okay, that's fine for anyone born overseas after June 1st. What about the children that are already there? So I have a niece who's living in the UK and she's 5. Does this impact her? The answer is no, not this piece of legislation. However, we have heard the concerns with respect to that, right? And the problem is still the paperwork. And so one of the reasons that we started by explaining immigration reform overall was so that you get a picture of the fact that we are tackling process improvements within the department. We are trying to simplify processes, we're trying to cut out steps, cut out waste, make it more efficient, have less paperwork, hopefully go paperless, electronic payments, less shifting around of paper files to different people's desks, streamlined decision making, all of that, right? That's under phase 2, which is currently underway. We're a year into that process. And so a part of that process is to look at this process and to make it much, much simpler for those children that are currently out there. Okay? So we will re-engineer that process. We will simplify that process so it's not a burden. So remember what the problem is. The problem is not that there is no path for this child here to get Bermudian status. The problem is paperwork. So we're going to fix that. So that's solving it going backwards. And then the legislation also solves it going forward because it just says that you're automatically Bermudian. Okay, so that's the first one, and that is what we're calling the repatriation part of the Repatriation and Mixed Status Families Bill. Okay? So now, let's go back to the Medeiros report and the 3 sort of categories that we have put those problems into, and now we'll start with problem 1. So problem 1 dealt with the fact that you might have one sibling, right, that has one status. So in this case, it's Bermudian status. And another sibling that does not have that same status. They have nothing. They're not PRC and they're not status. Same parents, okay? Both born in Bermuda, different dates of birth. And as a result of the cutoff, right, one child has no rights. And so the Medeiros report recommended that in that particular situation, the child that has no legal standing, the child that has no status, right, gets status as a result of their sibling. Okay? Now, the minister was quoted in the press as saying that there's no giveaway with immigration, we're not opening up the floodgates, and all of that is true. All of the requirements that are currently under the Immigration Act still apply. There's still the residency requirement, that person still has to be a minimum of 18 years of age, and everything else that is in the Act. None of that is changing, right? So they still have to meet, right, all of those criteria, but now, because of the cutoff date, that part is gone, and so now they can apply. Whereas before, they did not have that path. That's probably not the right word to use. They did not have that approach. Okay, so that's problem number one. All right, we're almost done. There's only 2 more problems, so stick with me for a few more minutes and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So the second problem, this is where we have 2 parents that have Bermudian status, and again, they have a child that does not have status. And this is because of timing, because the child was either too young or too old at the time that they qualified, and therefore they applied, and therefore they didn't get Bermudian status. So again, the optics of this: Bermudian parents, child born in Bermuda, child no status. So what was the fix? Well, the Medeiros report recommended that, that child should have status through their parents. And again, no giveaway, no special dispensation here, still having to meet all of the requirements that they would normally have to meet, but it's just the cutoff piece is the piece that has changed. Okay? So again, here on this side, we have a mixed status family. Now we fixed it. Okay? So that's an easy one. Now the third one. There's a reason that we left this one to the end. This one has to do with PRC. To summarize this, under the current immigration legislation, there are people that have the PRC that can pass on that PRC. And as a result of changes to the legislation, right, over time that has restricted that, there are certain people that currently have PRC that they are not able to pass on their PRC. Okay? And so what that does is that means as these people are in Bermuda and living in Bermuda and working in Bermuda and owning property in Bermuda, at some point, those that have the other type of PRC, they're not able to pass on that PRC. So if we want to get technical, the people who qualify for PRC under Section 31A of the Immigration Act, they're able to pass that on to their children and to their spouse. But those that obtain their PRC as a result of Section 31B, they're not able to pass on the PRC to their children, which results in those children not having any status. They don't have any situation, right? And so the fix for this was that the child would get the PRC through their parents. However, there's a wider issue of PRC, and we are aware of that, or rather there are other problems having to do with permanent resident certificate holders. So if you cast your mind back to the early 2000s, we called it long-term residents. And there was consultation, there was a white paper that was done on that, and there were changes to the act, and therefore we created this category called PRC. But some of these legislative changes over time have resulted in us having mixed status families. So in us attempting to fix the mixed status family, we're not actually fixing the wider issue and problem around PRC. And this is something that we are aware of. But if we go all the way back to the beginning of the slides, we said we were going to do mixed status families first. And this issue became so contentious, it was uncertain whether or not we would move forward with this bill if we didn't have an answer to this particular question. And so we had to come up with a compromise. Because the idea of not fixing mixed status families, because we can't agree on this one issue, it doesn't seem fair, right? So how do we fix this issue of PRC? And basically the problem that was cited was, how can you have a situation where you're allowing PRCs to pass on PRC indefinitely? This is going to lead to other problems. People are not going to be willing to stay here forever, indefinitely, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, all of these generations being born here, and be happy that they're not Bermudian. So that's not sustainable. And you could theoretically have a situation where you have more PRCs than you have Bermudians. So how can you let that go? I mean, yes, you're trying to fix the mixed status family, but you're also creating a bigger problem when it comes to PRC. So you fix this, but now you've created, so it hurts the head, right? So the issue of PRC is being tackled next. And what we needed to do for the purposes of this bill is we needed to allow ourselves time to work through the policy implications of addressing PRC. Problem, recommendations, right? All of the possible options, right? Here are the pros and cons. This is what the government proposes. Dialogue and consultation, right? The drafting, all of that process has to be done for PRC. We've done mixed status families. So the compromise, and it's not necessarily ideal, but I think it's pragmatic, is we will have this solution in place for 2 years. So there's a window. And then after that 2 years, right, it will revert back to the current situation, right? But within that 2 years, what we need to do is we need to actually put forth legislation that deals with the issue of PRC. So that's where we land. It's a compromise, but a compromise is not always a bad word. Sometimes, in order for us to move forward, we need to take the gains that we can. We need to fix some of the problems that we can fix, and we have to stick to the wicket, and we have to continue to work through some of the other problems. And so that's why we're saying this is not the end. This is the first step that this new administration is taking towards immigration reform, and there are more steps to come. Okay? So, with that said, that is the bulk of the presentation. There may be some specific questions on the legislation. I'm happy to take the questions and to write it down. However, I am not a lawyer. I only play on TV. And so we may have to get back to you with some of those questions. Okay?
Scooper? I'm just going to come down because it's actually on television, so it's probably a lot easier for us to.
I was interested to see you included this provision relating to grandparents. Now, I'm sure you know that the British nationality goes by descent, and it only goes to one generation. So you're actually creating a situation where you could have grandchildren who are not actually British nationals who will be supposedly qualifying under this. I mean, how are you proposing to deal with that?
Is your question specifically on the
No, what I'm saying is that the British Nationality Act allows people to acquire British nationality, in our case, a Bermuda passport, for one generation if they're born abroad. So as a result, if you've got two generations away, if you were to move to the States, for instance, your children would be British, but your grandchildren wouldn't. Now, in your proposal, you're allowing someone who's moved to the States, who has grandchildren, who will not be entitled to a British passport, but you're saying you would give them British status. Is that not going to be a problem?
That's a great question. That's an implementation problem. There may be a two-pronged approach, in particular for persons who are born in the U.S. because they're not a Commonwealth country. So in order to be Bermudian, as far as I understand, you also have to be naturalized. And so administratively, we will have to figure out how that 2 generations born overseas will actually work. So it's much easier for that first generation because really what we're waiving is the requirement for domicile. But that second generation, to your point, that does become a little bit more problematic. And so the short answer is that we need to fix that part, but that's a sort of back of the house problem. The way that the bill is actually crafted with respect to the Bermuda Immigration Act, I think the bill actually fixes that. But we don't have any consequential amendments in this to the British Nationality Act because that's not ours, right? So we still have to work under the framework of the other acts. So just for those who are not familiar, one of the reasons that immigration is so complicated within this country is because it's the Bermuda Constitution we have to look at, it's the Bermuda Immigration and Protection Act, it's the British Nationality Act, it's the British Overseas Territories Act, I think there's legislation here as well. And there are all of these rules and regulations and various schedules. So to say, well, I want to apply for Bermudian status, you might have to look in 4 different places to figure out under what provision that person qualifies for. So it's not just as simple as saying 1 + 1 is 2. It just doesn't work that way. And that's part of the reason why administratively it's so burdensome to administer this. Thus our reason for looking at the processes and trying to make them more efficient. There must be a better way. This is 2020, you know. Surely we should be able to simplify these rules and use technology to get a better, more consistent, faster result. And that's exactly what we want to do.
Any more questions?
Just to carry on that point, one of the difficulties is that at the present moment we have substantial numbers of people who are entitled to a Bermuda passport who don't have Bermuda status through this one generation. And people might be interested to know that it was only in 1981 that the UK government allowed you to acquire nationality from your mother, which is relatively recent times. It perhaps shows that we're not as far behind the world as other places. I'm a little disappointed that you haven't extended the right to Bermuda status for people who have Bermuda passports, generally. As far as the future generations are concerned, you know, I don't know that's contentious. It's sort of a throwaway in the act. It seems to me that it would have been far better addressing the ones who are entitled to Bermuda passports now rather than talking about future generations. The other thing that, and I don't not support what you're doing, you will know that most South Americans are entitled to Spanish passports if they can show any ties going back. Israel's another country where you just really have to look in previous generations in order to get Australian citizenship. So I don't think it's a bad thing where people have a Bermuda connection, especially because we have this demographic cliff, which we're falling over, where we're not producing enough Bermudians. And I don't know if there's a solution for it, but our birth rate is such that we may end up like southern Italy and offering houses for a euro to get people to move. So I'm generally supportive of allowing people with a Bermuda connection through generations to have a right to come here, even if they only have a grandparent here. But I think it needs to be looked at a little more closely, and I'm a little disappointed that you're dealing with them that don't exist and ignoring them that do exist, if I can put it that way.
Thank you very much for those comments. I'll deal with the 2 points. The first point about the passport. Bermuda passports, that is a separate issue from Bermudian status. And so because we have different pieces of legislation, that Bermuda passport, it's actually an overseas territories passport that has Bermuda on it. So we derive the authority to issue that based upon that piece of legislation. Bermudian status is a byproduct of the Bermuda Constitution, the Immigration Act, and also the British Nationality Act, because we have to be naturalized and we have to get status. So it's actually different pieces of legislation. So to equate a passport with status, that's like saying apples with oranges. They're just not linked, but I actually get the point. I mean, the point is that for people who belong to Bermuda, should there be some way that they can become quote-unquote Bermudian, or rather the technical term is possessors of Bermudian status? And the short answer to that question is that is the issue of Bermudian status, and that issue isn't specifically being tackled in this bill. We're trying to focus on the mixed status families. So that's the first piece. The second piece is about the people that are out there that have a so outside of Bermuda, that have a connection to Bermuda, and them having an easier pathway or a process for them to get their status, as opposed to people who are already here. Valid point. But I think that the piece of this bill that deals with problems 1, 2, and 3, the mixed status families, we would point out that all of those people are here. Okay, so one of the criticisms that we've had, rightly or wrongly, is that the bill doesn't do enough for Bermudians, and I would respectfully disagree. Many of these people, right, are members of families that have Bermudians in that family. And the Bermudians are wondering, well, why doesn't my family member have the same rights that I have? And this is an issue that is not a color issue. This is all colors, black, white, all sort of backgrounds. People who were born here, people who came here from the West Indies, people who came here from the UK, Canada, so on and so forth. So it's not about origin either. It's about their legal standing before the Immigration Act. And the fact that in some cases you have a person who has Bermudian status. They are Bermudian, but their family member does not, right? Or some cases where the person has PRC, but their family member cannot and can never get it. So they can live their whole life here and do everything except vote, right? But their family member cannot. And so this is a domestic audience that those 3 problems are actually tackling. It is significant when we look at the fact that if people cannot fully participate in Bermuda's economy, right, because they cannot purchase a piece of property, or they cannot go to Bermuda College, right, or they cannot get a job here, even though they were born here, and they've lived their whole life here, and their family is here, and all of their connections are here, and we're trying to fix that with this bill. It's very difficult for me to appreciate the view that says that we're not doing anything for Bermudians. This is doing a lot for Bermudians, for people who are living here and have made their contribution to this society.
Thank you, Minister. It's the right topic, right? I think thanks. There was a brief reference tonight to the European Court of Human Rights and its view about not separating families and so on. Maybe I missed it while I was out of the room, but what is your view with a Bermudian who's married to a foreigner that has a Bermudian child? does that foreigner come within the ambit of qualifying for Bermuda status? They have the child, the parent of the child is Bermudian, the child was born in Bermuda, but one of the parents is from overseas. What is immigration's position on that point?
So let's go back. It's interesting that our first impression was from two prominent local lawyers, so I guess this is turning
You're very kind.
to turn into a legal
Yes,
clinic.
it's a simple proposition.
So let's go through it again. You're saying, just walk me through the proposition again.
One of the parents
Yes.
is foreign. The child.
So you're saying a parent is a non-Bermudian.
That's right.
Okay.
The child was born in Bermuda.
Child was born in Bermuda.
The child has Bermuda status. And
Hold on. The child has Bermuda status.
yes, it does.
How would the child have attained Bermuda status?
Because it was born here.
No.
I'm sorry.
No.
It
So to one of the parents. So the other parent was Bermudian.
the other parent is Bermudian.
Okay.
Yes. The child was born here, and it was registered with the Registry General before.
And so that child is Bermudian because let's say the mother was Bermudian, and the parents are not married.
No, they're married.
The parents are married.
Yes.
Okay. And so the parents are married, and so the mom is a Bermudian, the dad is not Bermudian, the child is Bermudian.
That's right. Born
Okay.
here of the parents. Yes.
So I'm going to give this to Dr. Mayton. Hold 1 second. This is where we go to our experts.
Mr. Pennison's question is what becomes of the non-Bermudian parent, is that correct?
That is correct.
So
One of
the
parents-
Bermuda Immigration Act addresses under 1980 that being married, the non-Bermudian would have to wait 10 years of marriage. So that's already in the act.
That's already in the act. Where does that parent go from that point? They subject to filling out all of the requisite documents. That non-Bermudian parent would then qualify in these mixed family circumstances. Is that correct?
I guess if you change your question, the route for Bermudian status is as a spouse of a Bermudian.
Yes.
So you keep asking about a non-Bermudian parent. Notwithstanding they are parent, but the strongest route for Bermudian status would be through the Bermudian spouse. And that's what the Bermuda Immigration Act answers under 1980.
Yes. I'm sorry if I used the word foreign, but
I'm not questioning foreign. It's the spouse you would make emphasis.
yes, it's
Right.
a spouse. Yes, because they've been married, and they were married at the maternal time the child was born.
Okay, so that particular scenario is not one that we have tackled within this particular piece of legislation, because there is already a mechanism within the Act for that non-Bermudian spouse to obtain Bermudian status. And so after 10 years of marriage, 7 years of residency in the island, and some other bits and pieces, right, they fill out the application and they get Bermudian status through their spouse. But in the meantime, they apply for and they get a spousal letter, and they're able to work and live here and come and go freely. And so that is already the existing situation that we face, and so we haven't even attempted to actually change that.
But the potential to treat it is there, is it? The 7-year requirement.
So for the purposes of this conversation tonight, we're looking at mixed status families, and so for the purpose of this conversation, I'm Brother Lou. Tonight's conversation is about mixed status family only. The Act was written in 1956 and has been amended over 100 times, and we know that this Act has some challenges, and we're going through this thing like literally piece by piece, and we've said we're going to focus our energy right now on the mixed status piece, and that's the chunk that we're trying to fix right now.
But your department is open to the anomaly and how it can be cured.
I can say that we're looking at this thing line by line, and I don't want to commit tonight to saying that we're going to fix that, because that's an undertaking.
Okay.
Sir.
Thank you.
Oh, and just now, you might have gotten there afterwards, everyone. The technical officer that gave the advice just now was the chief immigration officer, Dr. Denette.
Okay. Thanks.
I can get your questions tomorrow.
I know, but I want to ask one tonight. I need a clarification. As you said, immigration is something.
Sure.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around
Sure.
the bill that we're going to
Debate next Friday.
and how it affects everything. So I figured I'd take this opportunity to ask a hypothetical question. Hopefully I can get some clarity on it. It's dealing with the repatriation portion of this legislation. So let's say back in the 1950s, you had a Bermudian leave Bermuda to go to live abroad. Let's say the UK. The Bermudian living abroad, they haven't come back to Bermuda since they left. They have a child. That child has children. So now you have a Bermudian living abroad who has a child and grandchildren.
Okay.
Under this legislation, can you envision a scenario where the grandparent has status, the grandchild has status, but the parent does not? Because when I'm reading, like, initial reading of the legislation, it looks like that scenario could be possible. That the grandparent, who left Bermuda years ago, could have status. The child, under this legislation, would get it, but the parent would not.
Yeah, yeah. So I understand the question, and that's a good one. I can tell that you've been. Okay. Okay.
Turn yours back on.
Test. Test. Okay. So I can tell that you've been reading the bill. That's a really great question. We have spotted that particular scenario as well, and there will be a floor amendment when this is debated for the second reading.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. However, having said that, the policy intention is that that same scenario that you outlined, the grandparent would be Bermudian, and the child, that adult child, would be able to obtain their Bermudian status, and that's currently the process under the Act now. So they can apply now, but they have to prove domicile in this particular case because this is going back in time. This is retroactive, and theoretically, the child could also apply for and get Bermudian status if that adult parent had successfully become Bermudian as well, and they can prove that they were domiciled in Bermuda at the time of birth. So, I know that sounds complicated, but there is a way for all three of those generations to be Bermudian under the current Act without us actually amending anything. The issue, again, is the paperwork. By going forward, the specific issue that you raised, we're going to clarify that in the floor amendment.
Are there any questions? Are we sure there are no further questions? As you can see, tonight we took the opportunity to go through the repatriation and mixed status bill. This was something that has been a work in progress. A number of people have had questions around it. Next week, Friday, we will debate this in the House. I believe it will be a lively and a robust debate. As you can see, MP Richards has delved into it. He's highlighted some of the challenges. We believe it represents and will represent a watershed for our country. I believe that this is an opportunity for us as a country to look at how we live together and how we work together. My mind's eye goes back to where we were, I think it was 4 years ago, when we were marching around the House of Assembly, where we were disquieted. The country was angered where we were with reference to immigration reform. And in the back of my mind, as we sat on the bipartisan committee together, we looked at this as the work that we have that will be our legacy for Bermuda. And I believe that, and I don't apologize for saying this, we want a country where Bermudians could be proud of where we live and have a place of primacy for Bermudians. But we also realize that we have to look through ourselves and for ourselves and what do we want this country to look like. The mixed status family bill, this was something that we wrestled with. We were in a room, and at times this was a contentious piece of legislation for us to work through. At the end, I believe that we have something that we can give to Bermuda, something that we can be proud of, something that I think represents the sentiments of our country. We have not finished our work. There are a number of things that we will have to continue to grapple through. And so when somebody says, well, you did not tackle this, we actually know that. We know that we're going to have to go back into this room, lock the door again, and start to work again. And we hope to start recommence our work directly after this matter is debated. I become frustrated. One of the reasons why I have stopped talking on social media about this is because people do not realize what is at stake for so many different elements in our community as we work through this. And I think it's very important for us to have the conversations that are balanced, that are fixed, and keeping all the conversations in mind. We had the opportunity to talk to the leadership of the People's Campaign, to talk to the leadership of the unions, to talk to the leadership of our party, to talk with we had the opposition in the room, and they were giving us the perspective. We met with the alphabet soup, a bear, all of the key stakeholders, and we were able to take different segments of our community. And the conversations, we heard about the history of racism in Bermuda. We heard how immigration was used as a weapon, how people were kept at an abeyance from reaching their potential in this country, and how immigration was used. We heard about families that were struggling to find their way because they had to leave Bermuda. And so we've heard all different spectrums as it relates to immigration. When we made that decision, we talked to families and young Bermudians that are not being able to find their rightful place in this country. And we kept all of this in mind when making our decisions and coming forward to look at the mixed family legislation. And we believe that we have made decisions that reflect our country, keeping the nuances in mind where we are economically, where we need to go with reference to our deficit, and keeping all of these things in mind. And so we are not burying our heads in the sand. We have some social nuances, we have political nuances, but more importantly, we believe that we have to do what's right in keeping the tapestry of our country together. I'm going to invite to say closing remarks Mr. Famous and Mrs. Ming. Before we close, I think it's very important for me to hear the words of my colleagues before we close. I'm just asking you to indulge both of my colleagues as you can speak from the floor, you can speak from the mic, but I would like for both of you to say some closing words. Both of them worked with me. They were on the committee before I joined, after the passing of our late colleague, Mr. Walton. Right? You can speak from either mic, you can speak from either place.
Good evening again. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for the pointy questions. Despite what some people think, we enjoy pointy questions because then we can actually articulate answers to everything. We know that immigration is always going to be, or has always been a sticky issue. But MP Silver Richards and his colleagues and myself and Renee, we have worked together as a team. So despite what you see on the roads, we can't actually work together. And what you see up there is us working together. Thank you.
I don't think it's much for me to say other than to say thank you very much for coming out. And I'm the news person, James will tell you I write on just about everything that's there. So it gives us something to take away and to consider as we move forward. It has been a pleasure. Thank you, MP Richards, for your questions, because I'm already sussing through my stuff, looking back through some other notes now to see if we address that, probably even in a conversation through the time. But definitely been a journey, one I look forward to continuing and hopefully to bring about comprehensive immigration reform that is suitable and reasonable for Bermuda. Thank you.
I'd like to thank P.S. Anderson for doing heavy lifting tonight, preparing. Can we give him a round of applause? I'd also like to thank Mia for doing all of the background work, and Renee from our team for taking care of all the logistics. Thank you to everyone for coming out. I'd like to thank my mom for coming out as well. Thank you to everybody for coming out tonight. Appreciate you. Thank you, everyone.